and that is the team from Cambridge, who are going to defend their motion 100 years later, remembrance is dead. The first speaker, Mr. Ashish Kumar.
I know you don't like us because we're the team that was giving points of information to Sciences Po, but give us a chance. I thought I had 14 points, but I'm not Woodrow Wilson, so I bring you one depressingly British point. Though it's not that depressing, as you'll find out. Your Excellency, distinguished judges, ladies and gentlemen, here is a number. 5,152,115. What does it mean? Well, nothing, of course. It means nothing. It's only a symbol. It is a representation, and alone it is shorn of meaning, it is shorn of life. It's not even that meaningful if I tell you that's the number of soldiers who died in World War I. It doesn't mean very much, because these numbers don't just beggar belief. In a really important sense, they go beyond it. What does 5 million mean? Can we imagine it? Can we stack it up in our head? Probably not. We probably don't have 5 million of anything inside our heads. What then to speak of 5 million human beings dead? What we tell you today is that the importance of remembrance is to close this gap of moral feeling, to make people whose lives seem very small, very remote, and very tragic alive to us in a way that they have not been before. And the great lesson of World War I is at least a humanitarian one. During World War I, 30 different chemical weapons were deployed against soldiers with horrific effects. The Germans released 68,000 tons, and the British and French released 51,000 tons. So there's lots of moral abhorrence to go around. It was the first war where we dealt with shell shock on a large scale, or what we today call post-traumatic stress disorder. Europe was the first continent to learn about the horrors of unmitigated modern warfare, and those lessons have been passed on to the world. We tell you that true remembrance of World War I demands that we care, and that we engage in a principled reenactment of the things that we have learned. And that's the vision that Michael and I are going to present to you today. So, do we care? Do we actually care today about people very far away from us, either geographically or culturally? And Michael and I don't think that everything is positive. In one sense, remembrance is dead. We heard about what happened on Christmas Eve 1914, but things are very different today. We are losing what little sense we had of our shared European identity. In the UK, I was caught in a UKIP rally once, and I was called quite nasty things. So as much as I'd like to believe Sciences Po, I really like to believe that everything you say is true, that the road is long and difficult, but at least we're still making progress. I actually think we've stopped making progress. I think we're backsliding. I think the rise of Euroscepticism in the EU Parliament is telling. And I think in that sense we have forgotten what it means to come together as a people. We heard about curved cucumbers. Well, the EU hasn't actually passed any laws about curved cucumbers. Neither has it passed any laws about curved bananas, which is another thing the Daily Mail likes to talk about. These things are myths about what the EU does. The EU does lots more important things than talk about which vegetables ought to be curved and which ones ought to be straight. But we don't know that, and that's the problem. We ought to know more about what it means to come together. In a broader sense, however, things are not so bad. Because, as I said, the key lesson of World War I was a humanitarian one, and we do take humanitarian action. And on that front, transatlantic relations are very, very important. Before Woodrow Wilson entered World War I, he was quite isolationist. And the US today is becoming a bit more isolationist. Not fully isolationist, but a bit more. I like President Obama's stance on it, sorry guys, but I'm a President Obama guy myself. But the fact that the US is spending less money overseas means that Europe has a bigger role to play. And I don't think it's all about self-interest, because the lesson of World War I is that it's not about self-interest, and we should not act in self-interest all the time. So in Libya, it was a transatlantic coalition that toppled a despot. We recognized the plight of people living very far away from us. It was French and British warplanes that took the first strikes. It was the European allies of the US troops.
Point of information.
I'll take you in a moment, just give me a second. Which struck more than 90% of the 6,000 targets destroyed in Libya. They did so with a precision, and this is me flattering you guys a bit, that the NATO former Supreme Commander called historically unprecedented. So, good job. Yeah.
Don't you think, there have been so many crucial stories of people who suffered from the First World War, that everybody associated with this has learned this lesson, that there are actors who have actively learned their lesson, and now they are doing this again. Don't you think so?
No, I don't think so, because the lesson of remembrance in World War I is that we have learned to sympathize with people separated from us by a vast gulf of time, people who lived in 1914 and died in 1914. But we have not learned how to sympathize with people living over a vast gulf of cultural space, which is why no British person on the street today is ever going to call himself European, unfortunate as that may be, which is why we don't care very much about many humanitarian things happening in other countries. So no, we have fetishized one gulf of time, but we should learn to fetishize other things. It's not a nice thing to say to you guys that you're not the nicest humanitarian people, but I'm saying you're getting there, on this front at least, and that increasing transatlantic cooperation is important. Look what happened in Ukraine. Again, we took some time because Europeans didn't want to sanction Russia because they would lose money, they might lose oil. But you got there in the end, and both you and US did the right thing, which is to tell the Kremlin the sovereignty of states matters. So no, in one sense, when it comes to sympathizing, I think we have lost our sense of remembrance. But in another sense, what it means to care about people living very far away, I do think we're making progress, and that transatlantic alliance is very important. Thank you.
I now call upon the second speaker from Cambridge University, Mr. Michael Dunn.
Ladies and gentlemen, the opinions of debaters change with the frequency of diapers, and depressingly enough, very often for similar reasons. But Ashish and I today are very proud to be defending something that we do passionately believe in. As a team consisting of a citizen of a former British colony and an Armenian Jew, we do believe that over the course of the last 100 years, there is much that the West has done, and perhaps more importantly, has not done, that we take issue with. And that's why we say that in a very real sense, for us, remembrance is dead. In fact, it might even have not been born. What we're going to tell you is that remembrance is much more than just a buzzword. It's rather about instilling in people an awareness of the legacy of those that died. And Ashish told you about the first part of that legacy, the notion of compassion, something, a front on which I think we failed in many ways. I'm going to talk about the second one, namely an overriding skepticism of nationalism. Because you see, I think that our reenactment of the tragedy and the sacrifice of those who died in the First World War has been co-opted by nationalism in a perverse way. And it's not hard to see this. In Britain, we open our National Act of Remembrance at the Senate Half in London with Rule Britannia. In the US, it's the Star-Spangled Banner. Contrastingly, in Germany, it's Ich habe eine Kameraden. Forgive the pronunciation. I had a comrade. What I'd like to point out is that it's that latter vision of comradeship, of esprit de corps, that we think should define how we look at nations and how we look at the interaction between them. But increasingly, in our remembrance of the dead, we think our mourning of those that died has bled into a glorification of the national project that, at least superficially, they died for. And that's wrong on two levels. First level, this is simply not the nationalism that they died for. These people died trying to protect their communities, trying to protect their families, trying to keep them safe. That is a very different nationalism from the broad sense of empire described by Rule Britannia, ladies and gentlemen. But secondly, it's perverse to glorify nationalism in the remembrance of the dead, when in many ways nationalism caused the conflict. When we believe that broad, undefined, amorphous national projects, I'll take you in a second, are worth horrific human sacrifice, we enable that sacrifice. Moreover, when we believe that the value of a human being comes from the passport that they carry and not their shared humanity, we commit a fallacy. And we commit that fallacy every year when we mix our remembrance with our nationalism. Go.
Don't you think that, for example, including the Austrian victims in a remembrance event in the UK, that this would actually be not the sense of all of this? Because it is just that a country like do something with its history. Isn't it like that?
Madam, those Austrians had families, they had friends, they had hopes, they had dreams, they had aspirations, and they were coerced by a state to go and die for a project that they probably didn't believe in. We think we ought to sympathise with them, we think we ought to stand by them, and we think we ought to honour them in our monuments and our ceremonies. That's the very least that we owe them, ladies and gentlemen. I'm now going to tell you why this is true in a wider sense. Because it's not just in our acts of remembrance that nationalism and national interest has obscured the human interest. It's in our politics. You look at the rise of Ted Cruz in the United States, of UKIP in the United Kingdom, of the Front National of France, and Geert Wilders in Holland, and I go on and on and on. And all of these people, though different superficially, stand for the same thing. For the idea that the interests of a small parochial group of people, arbitrarily defined as an accident of history, should matter more than those of other human beings who are suffering. Go.
But don't you think that those parties just want to gain power and use simple solutions and ideas for something that is rather complex?
Yeah, and I'm saying that the problem is that we're believing them, ladies and gentlemen. I'm saying the problem is that people are going out there and voting for them, ladies and gentlemen. I'm saying that the fact that you can now stand at the Franco-German border and cross without a passport, where previously there were trenches and fields of barbed wire, shows how pathetic and piffling these people are. And yet 25% of people support them. That's the sense in which remembrance is dead, ladies and gentlemen. That's the sense in which what these people fought for has been belittled by politicians with nothing but an agenda to push. And that's the sense of perverted remembrance that we stand against today. So, what do we stand for on our side of the house? What is our vision of the future, if you will? The first thing to say is it's a vision that we're a long way away from. It's a world in which our compassion for those suffering far away matches our knowledge and awareness of their suffering. It's a world in which our shared humanitarianism triumphs over local parochialism, where the jurisdiction in which you were lucky enough to be born shouldn't be the determinant of how much respect you deserve as a human being. That's not the world that we live in, ladies and gentlemen. But I hope that in 100 years, when hopefully the transatlantic debaters come together to do this again, God willing it will be. Thank you very much.